First on HTV, National Disaster, which tonight looks at the King's Cross fire.
It was an inferno of heat, smoke and flames. A nightmare for scores of passengers trapped in a ticket hall 20 feet below ground.
On a November night in 1987, a small escalator fire in the King's Cross Underground station erupted into a blazing inferno. This was Britain's worst tube fire.
And it's all flames and smoke and heat and people dying. You're totally unprepared for it.
And then you'll go to bed at night, you turn the light off. And if you lie there, as you breathe slowly, you get the smell of the smoke and of the burnt flesh in your nostrils.
Underneath the escalators wasn't cleaned properly. There should be no smoking in the stations. That makes you angry because you think, well, it could have been prevented.
King's Cross is London's busiest underground station. At peak evening rush hour, more than 100,000 passengers travel through it. 5 tube lines stop here. They're buried deep below ground. The station's 2 main escalators funnel most of the passengers to a central ticket hall, 20 feet below the surface. The Piccadilly line escalator was the oldest. Made of wood, it was installed almost 50 years earlier.
We were just about to step onto the escalator and someone shouted, "Quick, get off the escalator, there's a fire."
Flames had been spotted underneath a step at the right-hand side of escalator 4, coming up from the Piccadilly line. It was 29 minutes past 7.
And when we looked up, we could actually see that there was a plume of black smoke pouring out of the escalator, and it was about 2/3 of the way up. Your momentum tends to carry you forward, but as we got up to the smoke, you could actually see flames licking underneath in the escalator chamber through the gaps in the stairwell.
Smoking had been banned on London's underground 2 years before, but many passengers were still in the habit of lighting up as they reached the ticket hall ready to leave the station. And a few minutes before John Berry passed over the fire, a lighted match, probably from a cigarette, had found its way between the gap in the escalator tread and its wooden skirting board.
We got to the top and we were standing around for a while thinking, well, is there anything we can do? And then we saw the 2 British Transport Police officers. So, I mean, you figure everything's under control at that point.
You could see the orange glow and a sort of little flame coming up the side on the steps of the escalator.
I thought it was a small fire on the side of the escalator, with the panelling, if you like, but it was just a small fire where wood was alight.
But it was a mistake to assume that this was a small fire. Beneath the treads lay the running tracks of the escalator. They should have been cleaned regularly. They weren't. The accumulation of grease and rubbish on the tracks was perfect fuel. If this wasn't enough, that week there had been a team of decorators working in the station.
And underneath the escalator there was the remnants of dozens of paint pots, bottles of thinners. There may be the normal paraphernalia which you would associate with a refurbishment of wooden escalators.
It was onto this highly inflammable mixture that the lighted match had fallen.
It was difficult to tell the extent of the fire. All you could see were flames. I couldn't see any London Underground officials, so I assumed that they'd gone off maybe to the control room or somewhere to call the fire brigade.
But London Underground had told its staff not to call the fire brigade to small fires, to tackle them themselves. The Transport Police, an independent service, had a different policy.
At that stage we had radios which didn't work on the underground, so I went back up and said to Ken, I'll get the fire brigade.
By this time we kept looking and the flames were getting sort of higher and higher and higher. And we thought to ourselves then, this isn't right, this is getting worse and worse. So we then decided to push everybody via the Victoria Line escalators.
While the fire continued burning on the Piccadilly Line escalator, the station remained open and passengers were directed via the Victoria Line escalators.
It was basically unheard of to close a whole interchange station down. And so what we had attempted to do was isolate that particular fire as an incident, but still attempt to keep the flow of passengers going.
I'd never been to King's Cross Underground Station before. I didn't know it. I wanted the Piccadilly line because I was staying in the West End at the time. I noticed the Piccadilly upcoming escalator was stopped. And the only thing at the top then was a very nasty smell of rubber, electrical, sort of hot, nasty atmosphere. So anyway, we went down this Victoria escalator.
By now, the fire had been alight for at least 9 minutes. And although above the steps it still had the appearance of a small fire, in the space below the escalator, known as the machine room, the blaze had caught hold.
This gentleman from London Underground had gone into the machine room, looked, seen the fire, and tried to attack it with a CO2 extinguisher. A CO2 extinguisher requires someone to get very close to a fire and use it, and there was no way he was going to get to a fire.
The intense heat meant London Underground's standard firefighting procedure was useless. But the machine room did have an easily accessible backup system.
That actual underground escalator was fitted with a drencher system. All he had to do was operate that valve and he would have put water onto fire underneath. But he forgot about it and walked out the machine room, leaving the valve untouched.
Without water or CO2, there was nothing to restrain the blaze. And above the wooden steps, in the trench created by the sides of the escalator, it was beginning to show signs of its real intensity. At the same time, smoke had started to creep up the trench and was pouring into the ticket hall.
The smoke was getting thicker by the minute. Ken and I decided that it would be a good idea to see if we could find some other method of getting passengers out. He suggested that we try the King's Cross Midland exit.
I said to them, well, down the bottom at the end of the Victoria Line is the gates that lead to St Pancras Station and to Thameslink, which we could use that to funnel the passengers out completely away from the danger area.
The exit between the Victoria Line platforms led directly to the surface, avoiding any contact with the fire. It would provide an obvious escape route out of the underground.
So Pat Balfour and myself went down there, but unfortunately we found the gates was locked.
The exit was padlocked shut with the chain. There wasn't any staff around to get them to unlock the chain, so we headed back to the circulatory area.
To the policemen, it seemed now the only route out of the station was up through the ticket hall. The fire had been alight for 13 minutes. Flames now followed the smoke along the escalator trench. Outside King's Cross, the fire brigade had arrived. First down into the underground was the officer in charge, Colin Tonker Townsley. After seeing the fire, he sent a runner up to the surface to Radio HQ with the message, "Make pumps 4." An unusual request for a small escalator fire.
Small fire, make pumps four pumps to deal with this, or 4 fire engines to deal with this. This is strange. But obviously Tom could realise that the fire was well below in the motor room, and it was quite a severe fire, and we're going to have to evacuate the station.
While Colin Townsley started to clear the ticket hall, British Transport policeman Stephen Hanson tried to evacuate people from the platforms below.
Steve started to wave people out with his arms, shouting to people, "Get out, get out."
We heard a voice from the top of the escalator shout, "Everybody out!" It was a very urgent call, and everybody turned round and started to go up the up Victoria escalator.
I generally thought that there was sufficient time for everybody to get out. So I went to the bottom of the escalator, trying to reassure people as I went that it was safe. They were frightened and bewildered, and they were looking for somebody to show them the way.
And so I was carried right the way up with a lot of people in front of me and a lot of people behind me, all pushing and falling about. We walked right into a complete wall of black smoke.
As more and more black wood smoke poured out of the top of the Piccadilly line escalator, the ticket hall was plunged into darkness.
You know, you were shoulder to shoulder with a whole lot of moving people, and I suppose I was in that concourse for, I don't know, it seemed ages, but I suppose it may have been 2 minutes, 2 or 3 minutes. It did seem ages.
The fire had now been alight for 16 minutes. The flames now reached the top of the Piccadilly line escalator. In less than a second, the ticket hall would be an inferno. It had been just 15 minutes since a small fire had been spotted on an escalator in King's Cross Underground station. Now, the temperature in the ticket hall was over 600 degrees Celsius. The blaze was so intense, it incinerated everything it touched.
If you could imagine looking into a furnace, that's exactly what it was like. And parts of the ceiling slats, steel slats, ceiling tiles, timber, were continually falling down.
The sudden intensity of this blaze is known and dreaded by firefighters. They call it a flashover.
For a second nothing will happen, and all of a sudden the fire come flying out at you. That's essentially a backdraft stroke flashover, and that's what occurred on that occasion. There was it's very difficult to explain, but like a load of Arctic lorries going past, there's a whoosh. And out of all the entrances and exits, thick black smoke came out.
Flashovers are commonplace, but the reason why one occurred at King's Cross was not. The fire on escalator 4 had acted like no fire before it. Experts now call this phenomenon the trench effect. Instead of rising up and travelling along the ceiling like a conventional fire, at King's Cross the fire was contained inside a wooden escalator trench. Fed from underneath, air was sucked into the trench, keeping the flames low. The fire spread upwards step by step. Fueled by the wood, as the fire crept up the trench, it got hotter and hotter. By the time it reached the top, it had all the concentrated force of a flamethrower. Because of this trench effect, no one in the station that night could have predicted the intensity of the blaze. So, just seconds before, the police had been directing passengers up into the ticket hall as a means of escaping a small escalator fire. Those closest to the flashover had died instantly.
you can say, I did what I thought best, which in truth you know is right. But the other school of thought is, I sent those people up there, and as a result of what I said, they got wiped out. And that is what you have to learn to live with. And that is the hard part.
Those who survived suffered horrendous burns. Among the seriously injured was PC Stephen Hansen.
He tried to get people out of the station as best he could, but I don't think he could have remained down there very long, because he wouldn't have made it out alive.
He had burns to his face and his hands, part of which was where he touched the barriers and whatever on the way out, because the metal had heated up to that. It seared the skin.
The intense heat now melted advertising hoardings and blistered paint on the ceiling and fascia boards. The burning paint and plastic produced cyanide. Just yards in front of these lethal fumes, the smoke-filled tunnels were jammed with passengers trying to escape.
Pitch blackness with this asphyxiating smoke getting down to your lungs, and everybody pushing and scrambling. You just hoped that the crowd was taking you outside to hit the air. When I go, oh, I've never been so thankful all my life. Oh, that was fantastic.
Norman Piddock was one of the last people to get out of the ticket hall alive. Behind him, the lethal fumes had caught up with the crowd, and among the victims was Fire Chief Colin Townsley.
He was found with no burns, but he had a member of the public who was badly burnt. And that tells me that he must have gone back to her. And statements from witnesses do say they saw a very tall bloke with a white helmet, if you like, shepherding people out, calming people down. So he stayed there to look after them. So Colin was the hero, but he would hate that. He would hate that word hero being used. He was doing his job.
Colin Townsley had been inside the underground for just 3 minutes before the flashover occurred. His body was discovered just feet from an exit. Close by was the body of a young musician. Ivan Tarasenko had also been spared the initial flashover, only to be killed by the toxic fumes.
He was on his way to a music rehearsal, so he was changing lines at King's Cross. How he ended up in the ticket hall, I'm not totally sure. Probably he was evacuated into the ticket hall from downstairs, because he would have had no other reason to come up the stairs. When he died, he was 25, so he'd be in his late 30s now. It was a complete fluke that he was there. That's something that's kind of hard to deal with, that, 5 minutes either way, he would still be alive today. And that's, that sort of chance thing is very, very strange and very hard to understand.
It's now more than an hour since the fire started at King's Cross, and the situation is still very confused. As you can see,
the bizarre nature of the trench effect had suddenly turned the ticket hall into a death trap. Below the inferno, 50 passengers, 5 policemen and a fireman were now trapped. With the only exit at platform level locked, the police were forced to flag down trains and evacuate the underground by the tube. Just 10 minutes after the initial flashover, the last 2 trapped passengers were put on a Victoria Line train. The British transport policemen stayed behind to fight the fire from below.
We thought we'd got all the passengers out, we'd got all the staff out, we'd minimised the delay to everybody.
34 minutes after the flashover, the exit between the Victoria Line platforms was finally unlocked, and the policemen got out.
And then we was upstairs and had a look at the remains of the bodies, etc. It was just like as if somebody had whacked you right in the stomach. It took all, it sort of deflated you. And then you started to think, oh God, maybe we didn't do that brilliant after all.
For 1.5 hours, the fire brigade had struggled without any plans of the station. London Underground finally delivered the plans at 9:15. By now, 200 firemen were in attendance.
We went down these steps into the ticket area itself. And it's something I'll never forget as long as I ever live, but there was these flames rolling like an ocean towards us, coming along the ceiling and coming down, bearing down upon us. And everywhere was on fire.
In the ticket hall, the fire was now feeding on more than 3 tons of combustible material. The intense heat and poisonous fumes made it essential that the firefighters wore breathing apparatus, but that limited the time they could stay below ground.
The breathing apparatus sets we're using are compressed air type, and their duration is approximately 40-45 minutes. At one point, we suddenly realised that we started running out of air.
Firemen also began to suffer from heat and stress. Ambulances which had arrived to ferry injured passengers to hospital now found they were transporting injured firemen.
All I remember was being taken up the stairs, placed on a stretcher, and then put into an ambulance.
At 1:46 on the morning of Thursday the 19th of November, 7 hours after flames were first noticed on the escalator, the fire brigade finally declared the blaze at King's Cross was out. In all, 31 passengers died in the inferno. One victim has never been identified. A further 50 people suffered serious burns.
Yes, the inquiry went through all the evidence, and at the end they turned round and said that myself and the other police officers had done what we could, and indeed we may probably have saved several hundred people's lives that night. But they may have exonerated you on the outside, but you haven't exonerated yourself on the inside.
In 1988, the Department of Transport inspector concluded London Underground, at its highest level, may not have given as high a priority to passenger safety as it should have done, and did not guard against the unpredictability of fire. 146 new safety recommendations made in the report are now in place on the London Underground.